Of all the characters you'll find in Fallout 3, GOB of Megaton may not seem like one with a long story. Don't let it fool you. This bartender has a background that you may have overlooked while chasing the main quest. I'm Mark from Digital Dissection. I make Fallout lore videos, and today we're examining the untold story of GOB from Moriarty's Saloon. When first exiting the confines of Vault 101 and making your way to Megaton in search of your father James, many of the first faces you'll encounter are those of the citizens now living in the makeshift town created in the guts of old airplanes. Despite the harshness of the wasteland, Megaton's populace isn't as beaten down by reality as others might be in the larger DC ruins. In your search for answers, however, you'll likely end up at Moriarty's Saloon. As well, the main quest kind of pushes you in this direction. Colin Moriarty, the saloon's owner, isn't exactly as neighborly as the rest of Megaton's settlers. And while he might be only financially motivated to provide you any answers on your journey, there's a much more friendlier path you can potentially follow. The saloon's bartender is one such way to advance the main quest, and this will lead you to a ghoul named GOB. And if you're nice to him, as well, you pretty much have no reason not to, he'll give you a discount on items he sells as a vendor. Unfortunately, if you ask him more about his history, there's a reason why he's so timid, as he's used to frequent beatings from Moriarty and the town's populace. GOB's story, however, didn't begin here. But to tell it, we need to venture far away from the friendly confines of the fortified settlement of Megaton and venture to a place called Underworld. GOB may feel out of place amongst the citizens of Megaton, but he actually represents a community that formed shortly after the bombs fell. He actually represents the many citizens in the recently created capital wasteland that emerged from their homes in search of better shelter and post-war survival. What we know about GOB's specific journey from this time is not exactly well established, only that he eventually made his way to the Museum of History like so many refugees from the war. The survivors began arriving at the Museum of History initially as a small group, which was comprised of a survivor named Carol and several others. Carol was only 26 years old when the Great War broke out, and is a primary source for much of the history surrounding the eventual settlement that became known as Underworld. While initially these survivors were humans by most definitions, eventually they'd see their skin flake off and their flesh become necrotic, leading to an entire community of post-humans who suffered ghoulification. As one of the earliest residents, she's lived in the ruins of the museum ever since emerging from a public fallout shelter within the DC area, and still remembers the terrors from the earliest days of the ruins being on fire, while widespread violence, raiding, and horrific conditions envelop the surrounding DC Mall area where the museum is located. Carol, despite having PTSD even over 200 years later from the immense bloodshed of the war, began to make sense of the new life she had in this community, eventually meeting her partner Greta in 2217. At Greta's insistence, Carol would open a bed and breakfast within Underworld named Carol's Place, and the couple has managed the small business ever since. Why Carol and Greta are important to our story is because in time they'd come to befriend GOB, whose full name is actually Gobtholomew. Yeah, I'm not making that up. GOB would grow close to Carol and Greta, leading them to figuratively adopting him. GOB was actually considered a younger ghoul by Carol's description, which led to an eventual familial dynamic amongst the trio. For years, however, GOB served the role of essentially being a child to the couple. While we don't know exactly how long this arrangement went on for, it was clearly a stronger bond than most Wastelanders develop. That is, if they survive long enough. What seems to be the case, however, is that GOB and Carol were clearly on better terms than GOB ever was with Greta, as Carol even seems to think that her partner became jealous of their adoptive son over time. It doesn't necessarily mean that Greta had it out for the younger ghoul, but her protective nature of her lifelong partner caused her to perhaps act untoward when it came to GOB at times. This may not be as bad as it might seem, however, as Greta is known for her sarcastic and deadpan behavior, which even fools the patrons she provides services for as the cook of Carol's Place. Despite the conditions surrounding them, the three ghouls found relative peace in an uncommon way, and became close-knit despite the super mutants, Brotherhood of Steel, and raiders that were always in close proximity just outside of Underworld's doors. The underworld settlement provided a good sense of stability to not just GOB, but to the many ghouls who would hear about its relative safety. Many more would continue to arrive in the centuries even after the Great War, even though the location has its faults and relies on trade to keep its facilities functional. For the most part, GOB was able to live a relatively normal life here. It was perhaps this life of stability that began to wear on him. Or maybe he was just bored. But regardless, sometime around the late 2250s to early 2260s, GOB would seek his own fortune and a future away from his adoptive parents. Despite the concerns of Carol and Greta, he'd re-enter the harsh environment that once caused him to find Underworld so many years before. Unfortunately for GOB, any sense of freedom he might have felt was short-lived. As quickly after leaving the DC Mall area, the ghoul would find himself captured by slavers. Perhaps a more battle-hardened individual might have provided a bit more resistance in the wastes. But GOB, being an unassuming individual with very little combat skills, never stood a chance. We don't quite know just how long GOB was in the custody of the Capital Wasteland's numerous slavers, but in time he'd be sold to Colin Moriarty, the previously mentioned owner of Megaton's largest bar. For the next 15 years leading up to Fallout 3's events, GOB would serve Moriarty in a variety of roles, as a bartender, a janitor, and a literal punching bag for the bar's owner, and suffer undue treatment from the citizens of Megaton. It's a bit of an oddity because so much of Megaton is considered civilized, but ghoul discrimination is unfortunately a reality for many societies in the post-war world, with GOB's new home not being an exception. His mistreatment would even be detailed in the Fallout 3 official game guide. Treated as a freakish, second-class citizen by many people in Megaton, particularly Colin Moriarty. GOB is skittish and nervous, always looking over his shoulder. He does his best to maintain a sense of humor and to be friendly with customers, but this is mostly out of his desire not to be beaten. His servitude under Moriarty is cruel at best to begin with, as he's required to work off his debt to the proprietor to earn back his freedom, but in the process is charged for his room and board. This cyclical agreement almost guarantees that the friendly and unassuming ghoul will be in this reality for an incredibly long time, until either he somehow manages to actually pay off his debt, or if perhaps he outlives his master. But more on that in a moment. I always felt bad for GOB as he was one of the first people I encountered while exploring Fallout 3's wasteland. And while Megaton seemed like a safe enough place to have a life, his mistreatment by several people there always made me think twice about this settlement. GOB being a slave, or by some definitions an indentured servant, made me wonder just how moral the community was. But in speaking to the saloon barkeep and others around, you can actually discover that he does have several supporters. One supporting group within the community is the nearby Children of Adam, who despite becoming somewhat tribal and radicalized in future installments of the series, managed to stay peaceful and a pillar of Megaton's infrastructure. Its leader Confessor Cromwell and his wife Mother Maya are also mentioned in the Fallout 3 official game guide as being one of the few individuals amongst the Megaton populace who treat GOB with a deep level of respect, and through their spiritual beliefs provide contrasting interactions with him that he typically doesn't receive from everyone else. While we doubt the Children of Adam provide him much support while he's at work, he does at least have someone to share his misery with while he's in the saloon. A Megaton resident named Nova spends the majority of her time alongside GOB at the establishment, as we'll call her a lady of the evening. When she's not working with clients, she can be found having many conversations amongst the saloon's patrons, and GOB himself. Due to proximity, the two have become quite close while she's lived in Megaton for roughly the last 5 years. Together they share a level of disdain for Colin Moriarty, as he verbally abuses both of them often. But Nova won't dare cross Moriarty, as her work there is the only current way she has to make a living. The silver lining, however, is that she and GOB may actually be more than simply work acquaintances. And despite Nova's primary income source, she appears to have feelings for him should you eavesdrop on their conversations. Nova, of course, has a considerable level of smarts in misleading players if you ask about the nature of their relationship, as she'll claim that she won't provide services to ghouls, and that her and GOB do not share anything more than a mutual employer. However, observing them for long enough will yield conversations that imply there is much more to their dynamic, which at least gives some hope that GOB knows more about human interactions than simply painful ones. What is nice about GOB is that he serves as a reminder that even with the troubling realities of Megaton and the treatment he endures, it's still possible to keep one's wits and a positive outlook. Even with looking constantly over his shoulder, the Ghoul bartender maintains an attitude that frankly doesn't seem destined to survive long in the Fallout series. This attitude extends to discussions had with the player should they meet both GOB and Carol separately, as he'll ask that you not tell her his true fate, as he doesn't want it to trouble his adoptive mother. What not all players experience, however, and a point that I saved until now, is that GOB isn't actually destined to be a slave forever potentially. But this outcome requires a very specific thing to happen. It's no mystery that many within Megaton aren't fans of Colin Moriarty, which includes those under his employ, as well as several citizens in the settlement itself. Should players intervene and delete Moriarty through whatever means they choose, GOB's fate drastically changes for the better. Should Moriarty die in Fallout 3, after a short time in game, usually within a few days, Moriarty's name will actually be painted over on the saloon signage, and GOB will officially take over the property as its owner. It's a rather welcome sight given the treatment the poor ghoul has suffered over 15 years, and a great hidden dynamic that isn't always seen, as bringing Moriarty's life to an end if done in a provocative way can prove potentially lethal if players aren't careful. While it's hard to say that trading a life for a life is always a good thing, in this case, giving GOB a future free of Moriarty's control is hard not to feel happy about. The only drawback is that even with this sweeping change to the environment within the Megaton settlement, Bethesda didn't seem to really give it much more development beyond what feels like an Easter egg. This includes no additional dialogue outside of the artistic design of the saloon signage, but even still, Moriarty sucks. So if you went this route, I've got your back that you did the right thing. GOB may not be the first character you think of when exploring characters within Fallout's universe, but I always appreciated him. And no matter how many times I might have played Fallout 3, I always took the time to treat him like a human being, just to watch him smile for a brief moment while having a conversation with a complete stranger. His journey across the waste is an unfortunate one for sure, but his story is relatively hidden if you didn't choose to ever interact with Carol, or even make the connection that they might have had a previous relationship of any kind. It's a fun layer to discover within a world that may not always feel connected, but makes a lot of sense when you start to connect the dots. A character like GOB, as good-natured and timid as he might be, should have someone, somewhere, that deeply cares about him. And while some players may not ever interact with him at all, his unique attitude and energy are rare in a world that would stomp him out for even having it. Frankly, GOB deserves better, and if you didn't help him before, we hope that you help him now. And with that, we hope you enjoyed the untold story of GOB, the ghoul who was met with some pretty unfortunate circumstances. Were there any facts about the saloon bartender that we missed? Did you find his hidden story? Let us know in the comments. You can also find our entire Fallout Stories playlist linked here, where we post weekly Fallout content, as well as a suggested video you might like if you enjoyed this one. As always, Wastelanders, keep on dissecting. Thank you for watching. This is Mark signing off.